No, what are you going to say exactly? Okay. So we start this time. I'll just introduce myself when I start speaking, and then when I hand it to you.
Yeah, very nice.
Does Sabina want to come up to here? Okay. Sabina, does it say here? Here? I'm going to do it. Okay, everybody. We are going to begin. Can you hear me okay? I'll try to speak a little louder, a little closer, almost eat it. Holding a clicker and a thing and okay, we got it. My name is Jane Anderson. I am a legal philosopher and I am the founder of Local Contexts. And we're really thrilled to have you here to join us to talk about what does local context do? Why does provenance of metadata matter? And how do you actually build Indigenous data sovereignty into data infrastructures? So I just want to take a moment to introduce the local context team that is here. If they could all just stand up or wave, that would be fantastic. And this is one session. There is a second session after lunch, which is more of a workshop, which will have more time for questions and dialogue. Encourage you to come to that if you would like. This is a very small room. It's quite full. But this will be that will be the space where you get to kind of really engage with the team and also identify who you'd like to go and have a chat with afterwards. This is a session where it's a symposium. So we have a number of speakers who are going to talk a little bit about both the questions of Indigenous data provenance, also the care principles and the data maturity model, as well as kind of work integrating the labels and the notices into particular databases and infrastructures and federal national collections as well. This is what's going to happen. I'm sorry.
Kia ora everyone. Maui Hudson toku ingoa, no te whakatohia, oia tēnā koutou katoa. So my name's Maui Hudson. I'm a member of the Whakatohia Nation. I'm one of the council members for Local Context, and I'm also on the GBIF, Indigenous Data Governance Task Group. So been around a lot of these conversations. We just wanted to sort of, in some ways, frame and shape the session around some of these sorts of ideas. And so some of this is the things that Lydia's already spoken about in her keynote, but it's also nice that it also connects to the things that Sabina talked about today. Some of the issues around provenance and the importance of that in terms of trading transparency and the ability for communities to have more control over the data that sits within their communities. So that's what Indigenous data sovereignty is really about. Just increasing Indigenous control over Indigenous data. And I just want to kind of sort of differentiate a little bit about how people talk about data sovereignty and then how we talk about Indigenous data sovereignty. Because data sovereignty is used not only by kind of corporations and thinking about how that relates in relation to the state, but it's also used for communities. That's how we think about it in terms of Indigenous data sovereignty. But then there's also people talking about data sovereignty in terms of individual contributors when you're a citizen scientist, what sorts of rights and interests you have there. So it's the sort of ideas of rights and interests and how they play out across these different levels. As Lydia had said, there's all sorts of ways in which we're collecting data and how that gets turned into knowledge. And I think there was some really nice distinctions in the session this morning. Lots of Indigenous knowledge is information rich, but often data poor. And so because we haven't got the kind of the data structured in the way which the scientists require it, or which we need for biodiversity monitoring or useful in the AI place, that's why it gets excluded from those sorts of processes. As we were seeing the movement into open science and the push towards having all this information available generally, and the FAIR principles were being used to promote that, there's a group of academics, Indigenous researchers that started thinking about how does this relate to our communities and the things that we're hearing in those places. And that's where the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance emerged. So the FAIR principles were really focused on the data and what the characteristics of the data were. And the bits that we're missing were, what does it mean in terms of the people part of it, and what is the data being used for, the purpose part of it. And that's how the FAIR principles got shaped around these ideas of collective benefit, authority, control, responsibility, and ethics. And why we promoted them both as being complementary, as you can see there. And so one of the presentations we'll hear first is the next piece of work, which is about how do you go from the principles level and start to think about what it looks like in practice, what sort of indicators to create, and we'll have an update on how that project is moving forward. Just that there's a whole range of challenges that we're dealing with, and a lot of them have been spoken about. The big issue that we're really thinking about is how do Indigenous communities stay with the data that comes out of their territories. So we know that as soon as data is generated, it moves out into the world in a whole variety of different ways. But as that happens, the kind of connection back to those communities dissipates. Maybe early on, maybe second or third use or 50th use. And so what can we do that allows that connection to remain so that other users further down the track can connect into those communities if that's something they'd like to do. And so that's where local context comes into play. I'd been doing work around research engagement, research ethics with Maori communities in particular, both in research generally and then in genetic research. And I got directed towards what had been happening in relation to the local context labels, the traditional knowledge labels, and could see how useful they could be for the issues that we saw emerging in those spaces. And so that's when I connected with Jane and became aware of local context too.
I'm not really good at multitasking with multiple things in my hands. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I have a legal background, as I mentioned, and my legal background is actually in intellectual property law. And so this is really where local context came from, was really understanding the way in which that body of law is a colonial body of law focused on property. And it has historically and philosophically been about dispossession of Indigenous peoples, both land and knowledge. And so understanding those particular dilemmas meant that Indigenous communities did not own their collections, their information, their songs, their sound recordings, anything sitting in archives, libraries, and museums that had been collected over these long periods of colonialism. And communities were just asking for a tool that broke that pattern. And so this led to the development of local context in 2010, working with communities around the world to kind of see if this is a solution or a kind of intervention that could make a difference, and slowly working out that that was something that communities needed, communities could use, but also could be a tool for institutions and researchers to do differently kind, informed, ethical work with and in partnership with communities. It's currently used in over 34 countries now, and has a lot of uptake in obviously the Kansas states or kind of English speaking spaces, but moving steadily into other language spaces as well, which is really important because these needs cut across nations, right? These colonial histories inform so many spaces in terms of how Indigenous communities cannot get access to or find their data. And this goes to Sabina's point today. If you can't find the data, you also don't know what the gaps in the data are. So we have developed a number of tools. The labels are tools specifically for communities to add authority, protocols, rules, sharing conditions, and permissions back into the record, and notices, which are distinct and are for institutions and researchers to disclose or make visible the Indigenous rights that sit with that information and data. We developed two different tools because the labels need to be flexible to recognize Indigenous sovereign interests. The notices are more flat. They're recognizing the responsibility that sits with those who steward Indigenous data to make that accessible, findable to communities in the first instance. So what you see with the icons is really the human readable component. All the labels and the notices have permanent identifiers that go with them, which is what makes them able to go into data systems. There's an API that is used through the local context hub that we've developed. And it's really about putting data in context and bringing people and place and people's relationships to data back into the systems. And it really is about connecting people, place, and environments and relationships over time. So this is kind of a key intervention that the local context labels and notices are seeking to make.
So one of the things I just say too is that there's traditional knowledge labels, because a lot of the things we're talking about is how information comes from those communities and is shared. Now, traditional knowledge has its own protocols around sharing that have been developed over time. And so all of the labels have been developed alongside communities to reflect what those protocols were. And now they're being shared and used across different communities. But when we think about the scientific data that's generated off those territories, that's not traditional knowledge. But there's interests and rights which those communities, they want to have a say over them, but they don't necessarily have the same sorts of protocols around sharing of that sort of information. So the other thing is that that information, even if this traditional knowledge is collected at the same time as the scientific data is generated, they don't always end up in the same databases. And so as different pieces move in different directions, there's different labels that can sit with those data sets as well. And I'll just give a quick example here. This is traditional knowledge labels. This is our community, Whakatoa here. And we've got traditional songs, it's a waiata, and we put them on an app so that they're available for our community members, 90% of which live outside of our area, so that they can access those as well. You can get this from the App Store, so you too can become part of Whakatoa here. You'll get like 2 songs, and then if you get in touch with us and we can verify that you actually are from our territory, then you'll get another 30. You get a password that gives you a sort of extra. So trying to get that sort of balance between things being open or able to be opened up and in return. But we also work with local context to add the labels for that as well, because we know if other people are seeing it or being used in different contexts, then they can see what our expectations around use look like. And we'll be able to show through the rest of the talks a whole range of different contexts where they're being applied. That was, sort of application in a digital context, but communities have taken it and used it in sort of physical markers and places. And so this is a medicine walk that's been generated, and you see they've put labels there in a different fashion.
And this is, again, just one example that really changed how and where the labels would be recognized within the data systems themselves. This is with the Library of Congress in the United States. This was sound recordings from 1890 that had never been connected back to their community. They were sound recordings, they were the first sound recordings that were actually made on Indigenous lands in the United States. They started to be returned back to the community in 2015. And in that process, the community actually wanted to add their traditional knowledge labels to the Library of Congress record in order to register the community's rights around those songs, rather than the copyright rights that were held by Harvard University. So through that project, we were able to add the labels, but then more than that, add the labels into the MARC record, which required adding them under the rights field. The Library of Congress is, of course, also where the Copyright Office is. So we had large conversations with the Copyright Office about adding rights that weren't copyright rights into the rights field. That was fun. That was a fun conversation. Partly because most people think that rights are only legal rights. Rights are not only legal rights. And then also adding JSON fields into the Library of Congress. This was really important because what that meant is this one community, the Passamaquoddy community, added their labels to 31 sound recordings, but through this process created the space for any Indigenous community to add their labels into the Library of Congress. We changed the system. So that's the labels, and wanted to give you some community examples of how the labels are utilized. Just wanted to move quickly into some examples of how the notices are used. The notices, again, kind of speak to the existence of rights. Rather than having those rights invisible, the notices make them visible. And in doing so, create action, create relationships, and create different kinds of partnerships. So this is a project with the Maine eDNA, the University of Maine, adding both open to collaborate, signaling to communities that they've done their work and actually want to do the work, and the biocultural notice saying that there are biocultural rights here. They're actually notified. You were saying this is something that Lydia was speaking to in the keynote yesterday, that they actually notify the key authorities of the communities when eDNA samples are made. This is going to be talked about a little bit in one of the presentations. This is the adding of notices and labels to Manaaki Whenua to a federal collection in New Zealand. There is a video coming up on that. There's a film we made about it as well, if you're interested. It's a beautiful film because it connects songs to data to eDNA. It's all data. Watch the film. The film's cool. Oh, it features Maui, Hudson. But also, a lot of people are like, this is really difficult work. Actually, it's not really difficult work. At the Smithsonian a year ago, there's 50,000 samples from Moorea in French Polynesia. In 2 minutes, we were able to add notices and notify a community across 2 databases. That changes how the community knows where those samples are, and also changes those systems so that people using that know that there are Indigenous interests here that have to be engaged. Yep, we're gonna get cut off. We are cut off. Okay, we're cut off. But the great thing is, we wanted to give you a quick primer on the labels and the notices. So for those of you who haven't seen them in use or haven't seen them being utilized, we're also moving into publication context. We'll keep talking about it. It's a lot to fill in. Oh yeah.
No, I think this is one of the important bits. So it's sort of like, labeling the data, and so that as that data moves into different things like publications, that recognition of the community travels with that and exists in those places. And we're working on that. And Lydia's been a big part of a project working with publishers, which she talked about yesterday, which is thinking about how that happens in the same way as we're doing it with GBIF.
And then the last thing I'll just say is the IEEE Indigenous Provenance standard that has been created, that Lydia mentioned yesterday, 5.5 years of work. I have to say that took a really long time to do it. It wasn't just the engineers, it was us in that context creating that standard. Out on the 14th of November, we are making it public access, so open access. This is a huge deal. This is the first data standard for Indigenous peoples ever. So I just wanted to end there. We're going to introduce the speakers. Everyone's going to introduce themselves when they come up, but I wanted to just quickly begin by introducing Cassandra Sedran-Price to come up, and Cass is going to talk about the care data maturity model. You can... Yeah. Have a pocket. Okay. Have one. And he's going to look here. Yes. Okay.
I'll put it up. Yeah, maybe I can do this now, but I'm not got two things. Yeah. Go. Do we want that also? Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Cassandra Sedran-Price. I'm a proud Maori woman of the Gungari clan. It's a really awkward setup. I usually like having that little buffer zone of them, you know, so I can hide. But I was originally trained in marine science and ecosystem modeler, but I've since moved on into more Indigenous health and supporting Indigenous rights through Indigenous data sovereignty. I work a lot with Maui and Cody and everybody here today. Oh, it's got the, can't you hear on the little? So I need to be louder. Sorry. This is some work that I've been supporting with Riley Tadafong, who unfortunately can't be here today, but I'm presenting this on behalf of her and the team. So what we're doing is we're developing the care data maturity model. And at home in Australia, what we not often do is when we're on Indigenous lands, we acknowledge the lands that we're coming from and also our First Nations peoples. So I just want to acknowledge all the First Nations peoples here today and everybody that's at the conference as well, and extend that acknowledgement through to our elders and old people. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to talk a little bit about what Indigenous data is, and Lydia talked about this yesterday. So it's data, information and knowledge in any format that impacts Indigenous peoples, nations and communities at the collective or individual level. So it's quite a broad definition. And I'm going to start up here, data about us. So I'm just going to unpack little bits first. So this is all about our traditional knowledges, our cultural information, our languages. At home in Australia, it's we refer to this part of Indigenous data as Indigenous ICIP, Indigenous Cultural Intellectual Property. So at home in Australia, there's a bit of a movement to enact these rights through the legal system. The Australian government is working on how we can actually do this, but also at the moment as well, we can protect these rights through our contracting system. So when we're working with researchers in the universities, a lot of our Indigenous rights to protect that sort of data is through contracting systems. The other one that we have is data about us. And this is pretty straightforward as well. This is all your health data, all the demographic data and everything that we see. And a lot of people understand these two topics. But where it gets a bit tricky is when we start talking about data more than our human relations. So this is referring to environmental data, our sacred ecosystems, territories, geospatial data. And this is where a lot of environmentalists actually can't get their head around. But what you're actually doing is you're working on Indigenous lands and on Indigenous community lands that's been belong to our communities. So me as a Maori woman, I'm a traditional owner and I sit on our traditional owner board in conjunction with Parks and Wildlife. And so I want to know what's happening on my country and the health of my country to be able to make informed decisions. And that's why I need to be involved in these decision-making abilities about what data is collected on country and how that data is collected. So when we're thinking about Indigenous data, most of our Indigenous data has been collected by other people apart from ourselves. And a lot of this data sits within different data actors or institutions, and we don't often have control over that data. So for us to have true sovereignty over our data, we would have to be in possession and own that data. So when in cases where we don't have that control, what we're actually wanting is for organisations and institutes to uphold our rights and interests through Indigenous data governance. And in Australia, and it's different for each nation, these rights are supported through UNDRIP, and Australia is a signature to UNDRIP, so organisations should be providing Indigenous people with the opportunities to enact these rights. So that brings us through to the care principles. Maui touched on this today about how they were developed, and they're definitely designed to sit alongside FAIR. FAIR is not enough. It doesn't enact our rights, and it doesn't protect data which needs to be protected. And also it doesn't form those partnerships that we need to be able to gather the right sorts of data that's needed for our community. So what we've got is we've got collective benefit. So these are designed to, across the data ecosystem, to provide benefit back to our communities. And each one of these principles has a subset principle. Authority to control, that's at the heart of the care principles. And this is designed to enact that Indigenous governance or the data for governance across the data ecosystem through to responsibility. And this is where we're really looking at forming those positive relationships. So moving from that consultation process through to Indigenous-led and Indigenous decision-making, and then ethical relationships and ethical use of data and reuse of data, because we want to minimise further harm to our people through what injustice has happened to our people, and also putting conditions around our future use of data. So why a care data maturity model? At the moment, care is getting a lot of traction. Been talking to lots of different organisation researchers and non-Indigenous institutes, and a lot of people are saying, oh, we're doing care. When you start going into those conversations, there's no Indigenous people involved in those conversations about how they're enacting care within those organisations. And if we go back to authority to control, it's about Indigenous-led decision-making across the data ecosystem. And so what we're doing with the care data maturity model is we're breaking it down so that we can provide guidance on how to enact each of those principles and sub-principles. And it's based on the FAIR data maturity model, which everybody is familiar with as well. Oh, and that went way too far. Too far. Back. So getting a quick view of what's coming. Okay, indicators. So what are we doing? As I was saying, these are going to be the building blocks of the care data maturity model. They're going to enact or help recognise what you need to do for each of the sub-principles. And what we've done too is for the indicators, we just haven't stopped at researchers. We've actually developed indicators for individuals, institutes, not-for-profit organisations, for-profit, for funders, which I'm really excited about because we've had a lot of those conversations around how the funders actually dictate to us what research is valuable and what research is not. So it's really excited to see that happening there. And then also the work in the repositories. We're looking at developing the priorities. So which of these indicators or the care principles are essential? Because when you see the principles all together, a lot of people get overwhelmed and they're not sure where to start. So we've started looking at the priorities of those care principles so that people can actually not feel so overwhelmed and actually make a start. And then we're providing a whole bunch of guidelines similar to how the FAIR guidelines are, but we're also looking at an interactive website of how the care principles, you can click through and it's a bit more interactive of how you can actually do this with a whole bunch of examples and case studies as well. So this is a bit of I won't read through the definition of the indicator, but this just gives a good example. So this is A.1, recognising Indigenous people's rights and interests to their knowledge and data. So what does the draft indicator look like? So this might look like data sharing agreements that explicitly state Indigenous data sovereignty or Indigenous data ICIP rights. Oh, and it's done. Oh my God, it's got to go back again. It's a bit clicky. All right, there we go. So this is one of the other indicators. So this is looking at free, prior, informed consent. So here you can actually see how we've started dividing up across from individuals through to repositories. And again, looking at the funders' responsibilities across how they can enact and support Indigenous rights and interests through the funding process. And we divided up for not-for-profit and for-profit because there's slight differences in there around corporate knowledge and what happens within those institutes as well. This is a bit of an overview of the draft indicators, which you've seen about 3 times now through the different slides. But I just really want to put out this one here as well, conducted data needs assessment. So I'm really excited about that. And that's something really easy that researchers can do. So I'll give an example of why that sort of data needs assessment is really important. So me working as a researcher, I've been involved in an air quality project. And as always, the Indigenous person gets brought into the project after the funding process has already been through and after the research project's already started. So I went over to Southeast Asia, so I'm not Southeast Asia, to work with the Indigenous communities over there. And what happened was the researchers had already decided on the air quality mechanism, so a homemade air filter, and they were going to put that into Indigenous homes and see if that reduced the air or improved air quality within the housing over there. When we got over there, the Indigenous community don't have doors and windows. So how is this $5 million project going to benefit the Indigenous needs? So that's really important and it's really easy to do, but I'll move on 5 minutes. So what we've been doing is we've done a whole bunch of presentation workshops and webinars, and we've also got feedback. And we've been working with individuals, funders, institutes as well to get the feedback. And this is some of the feedback that we've got, that the language wasn't strong enough to begin with. So we've actually gone back through different drafting and gone back out. And so we're pretty happy with the stronger language at this point. And hopefully these principles will be released early next year, or the data maturity model. Example in practice. So this is the ERGA, and what they've done through here is they've worked with individuals to actually look at metadata and how the NIGOA protocol is actually embedded in standard operating procedures throughout this, and that onus is put back onto that individual researcher to abide by those standard operating procedures. But also they've also, through their metadata, is supporting Indigenous collective rights through the PK and BC labels that Maui mentioned earlier. I won't, that one wasn't me. Just to that, I've got to go back through all the slides again. I won't talk about that one because of the time, but I'll just spend a little bit of time about some of the new work that's happening in Australia. So this is what we're calling the Indigenous Data Foundation. So we're going to be, and this is the first time we're doing it at this level in Australia with the National Earth Environmental Science Facility Forum. This project is funded through Australian Research Data Commons Planets. And what we'll be doing is working with a bunch of these research infrastructure organisations to see how we can embed the CARE principles throughout the institutes. We're calling it the foundations because it hasn't been done before. We don't know how far we will get, but it's a 2-year project. Maui is also involved and as well. And what we'll be doing is looking at frameworks, toolkits, training guides, and best practice to support the management of Indigenous data within these systems. And again, one of the challenging processes here will be looking at that environmental data and what does that mean from that broad definition and how can we actually operationalize that. We've got the NESIF members here also include some of the CSIRO business units, such as the Marine National Facilities, Atlas of Living Australia, Bioplatforms, which also holds genetic information, PAWSI, which is supercomputing. But we've also got technical support from the QUT Data Centre, and we'll be also working with GIDA and Steph Russell Carroll and Riley and Co. If you want to know more about the CARE data maturity model and where it's at, just scan this code. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to take a photo or scan that code. You'll find a lot of information up there, but also Riley doing a few more videos on the CARE data maturity model and some of the examples in practice as well. So that's a really great resource. And I just want to say thank you to all of our funders and to all the collaborators through this project. It's been really great to be involved, and I've been learning a lot as well. And for those interested in more Indigenous data sovereignty, we've got a summit coming up in the US. So also scan that code. Abstracts are due in at the end of the month. So if you're interested there, please come along. That's it. No slide panel. I should have given it to you.
Do I have to do anything? Right. All right, for those online, if you can't hear me, speak now or wherever hold you. All right, strap in. Right, as Jane and Maui said in their introduction, part of this is also showing how we can integrate the TK labels and the BC labels and other assets that help us move towards CARE alignment into existing federations and data federations. So this is some work that I did with Ashley Rojas and also the team at Local Contexts in the context of the Ocean Data and Information System, a system run by IOC, the International Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, which is basically trying to federate out metadata collections around the world to build a little bit of an ocean intranet. We'll see that later. So this is just a sort of introduction. We can talk more about the details. It gets a bit technical, but it should be fun. Right, so let's jump in, if it works. All right, the mission of ODIS, the Ocean Data Information System, was to network the existing data systems around the world. There are many, they do their own thing. We don't want to interfere with their internal processes, but we need to be able to know what they're doing, what they have, and what they're capable of. And the whole mission is to network this diverse group of nodes, or rather systems, recognizing their independence, which correlates very much towards a sovereignty kind of conversation. And we said, well, we're not going to build a new database or a new data hub. We're going to use the web technology just so that to help these things talk to each other and regulate how they talk to each other using standards that already exist, that IOC does not control, that are in operation. Many of you have, if you've searched on your phone today, you probably already used these metadata standards at least 50 times today, right? So using the web as it is to move things along. Oh, look, it is fast. Right, so ODIS, in a sense, there's a program component of IODE that's part of IOC. That's the thing that coordinates the federation. So you need a federating entity that sort of makes sure everything's working and helps partners resolve conflicts if they arise or take new opportunities. The ODIS Federation is the partnership of all of the systems connected, and ODIS itself is the system, the actual data system itself, all the things talking to each other. We have 59 nodes right now. Some of those nodes are a few people with a laptop, and some of them are national organizations that represent hundreds of organizations themselves. So we go from continental scale nodes to somebody with a laptop. That's our digital equity stance. We build this ocean data ecosystem on this to help it mature together, and we coordinate with others like WIS2 from the WMO to then allow our ODIS partners to interoperate with other data systems and federations without any additional work. We watch it, right? Because we built this on architectural principles, we can watch the health of this network. We see how many data sets are moving through which partners, from the Pacific to NASA Space Science, from UNEP data catalogs to Western Indian Ocean or individual institutes. And we can see if there are errors, and we can sort of verify that things are working. So remember, FAIR is just a group of principles. You can implement FAIR in many ways, and two systems that are FAIR can be completely non-interoperable. We're making sure that's not the case and that we don't build FAIR silos as we build the federation a little bit bigger. So we monitor it, see if this works again. There's more information there, but that's just the context we're operating. The main principle of ODIS is that we're helping this original vision of the web, moving data from proprietary formats into linked open data. So the kind of data that is easy for machines to identify, pick apart, look inside. So they don't have to like troll through a PDF or figure out what your colors in an Excel sheet mean, et cetera. So we're trying to make this happen with all the systems in our federation to make the data flow a little bit. So what that means is that when a organization, this is the Center for Marine Tropical Ecology in Germany, when they connect their sitemap, which is something very standard. Every website has a sitemap, and that sitemap tells us where their metadata lives. If you follow one of those links, you get to a metadata object that in this case describes the data set, the people who produced it, so we're back to the provenance, the credit, the publication data set. That's pretty cool. So you can do that for many, many different kinds of types. And this is what a machine sees when it looks at that. It's a small graph. This is the graph of that data set, who did it, what the licenses are, et cetera, in using semantics that are understood by millions of computers right now. Schema.org is what the big five use, et cetera. So we can do that. And we can build a real graph of all of our stakeholders. This is the data graph. That's OBIS over there. But again, as more people connect, smaller systems, we can actually see what's going on. And that's helping these systems coordinate and orchestrate activity. Then we can federate out to OBIS. We work with Goose. We're trying to build a bridge to the WMO and UN Environment and any other partner that comes along. And we can start putting the data on the map just by its metadata. So that's the internet. So we're trying to structure the ocean bit of the internet a little bit better so that it can talk to other chunks of the internet that are out there. And this is an opportunity to make sure that we can inject now what we need to do to communicate indigenous interests into this space, since it's already structured. So what Ashley and I and others on the team did, we looked at the labels and the notices, and we said, okay, how can we integrate that into this digital conversation that's happening now with linked open data? So that we did. We translated the labels into that form, linking it to the local context system so they can populate it from their own node and be able to push that information out to the system, including multilingual support, different characters for languages that are indigenous languages and encodings, licenses to make sure people see those labels where they need to be. So this is like the rights conversation with the Library of Congress, and also linking off to the images so that people can know what kind of image to put where. So again, that gets translated into a little graph and then pushed into this whole map of the ocean data that's happening. Why did we do it? Again, when we're talking about asserting provenance or indigenous provenance or rights or interests, if you assert something, you don't wait for somebody to come to your system. You push it out there so that they see it, even if they're not looking for it. The same way that when you do a search on a search engine, you find stuff that you don't know anything about the source system, but they put it in the collective index. So that's why we sort of did it. And from Lydia's keynote, this sort of addresses things like, well, it's not really relevant to my work. It might be relevant to work. You just might not know it because your asset is misconnected. The same thing, this balance between mainstream trends of open science, open data, and these interests. This is a bridge, what we're doing, connecting the two so they work together at the same time. So again, when you run a web search, often you get structured information popping up on the side. You've seen this, all of you have seen this when you run a web search. This is biodiversity information. There are links off to our friends over at GBIF, Wikidata, Wikipedia, et cetera. And that's running on the same technology. Again, why we didn't create our new standard, because now we interface with an existing network of information. Time? What am I doing? I can talk faster, believe it or not. Right. Yeah, so the whole... Three or... Okay, relax. Right, so, but that's the whole point. Like this is a bridge between generic systems, like the stuff you use on your browsers every day, and then specialist systems. That's an important thing to do. When we talk about control and authority to control and the ability to handle indigenous data while respecting rights, you still have to find it generically, but then you can link off to a system that can actually respect those boundaries, create data enclaves, et cetera. And we're trying to find that balance to make sure things are present, things are actionable and interoperable, while immediately being confronted with the labels, the notices, and anything else that is relevant to regulate the use of the information. How did we do it? Well, we looked at each TK and BC label and also the notices in great detail. We tried to translate what was said in each one into the schema.org JSON LD and to see how far we could get. We recognized all the way through, it's not going to be perfect, but it's just like when you come to a conference and you speak a language that's not your own. It's not perfect, but it's going to get people asking questions to learn what is a better way to do it. So we went through all of the TK labels. We looked at certain properties in schema.org, like the publishing principles, ethics policies, usage info, that are already picked up by all federated systems that are using this technology. And we translated that. So this is what a label would look like. It was a creative work. You can put in multiple languages. You can put in your attributions, your organizations and communities, etc. Other things like community voice, right? Used when you would like to encourage community members to share their knowledge, stories, and experiences. So it's like an invitation, which is handy because in the schema.org thing, when you're actually putting potential actions like on web pages or in technology, there is an invitation action. So the machines can understand that this means an invitation. And then you can put in the content of the label into that. So they understand what kind of invitation it is. And systems natively discover it. Same thing with this, with attribution. This label should be used when you would like anyone who uses this material to know who the correct sources, custodians, and owners are. Especially useful if the material has been wrongly attributed, etc. So handily, there is a data type inside there called a correction comment. And the nice thing about linked open data, even if you don't control that data set, it lives in a different repository, you can still publish this, link it to that data set, so people know there might be something that needs correcting. Yeah? So the conversations that are being had at a human level can be reinforced with digital technology so people discover in that big federated map that we saw that there's a conversation to be had about certain assets. And they can't say they didn't see it. So what's the impact? I think, we've already hinted at it. But again, as we're structuring and building structures in the internet, sort of cleaning it up and not letting it just be controlled by corporate interests, as most of it is now. We all witnessed what happened when Amazon went down, right? We're trying to just sort of open that up a little bit and make sure that in this very widely interoperable space, we can actually put the indigenous, let's say, digital voice in there a little bit more loudly and a little bit more clearly. So that's it. That's on the internet side, but we're also, new data fabrics and data architectures are emerging. And these metadata graphs are what's connecting things like data lakes, data warehouses, mediation services, products, digital twins. They're using the same technology or similar, close enough, to talk to each other, to crosstalk within one another. So concluding remarks, it's possible. Yeah, it is possible to do this in linked open data and to use standard web architecture the same way that anyone builds a web page. So you can contract somebody, they don't need a PhD or a graduate degree. The person who built the website of your barber down the street can do this. And we can start putting this and actually asserting indigenous provenance or interests in a system so that it's natively seen, as I've said. This allows us to bridge these external systems to then more specialist systems or let's say community-focused systems. But it's a kind of, again, an invitation and a bridge to get systems working together more clearly. We can start then supporting interfaces, and I stress that, the interfaces to Caroline technology stacks, data exchanges, et cetera, so that these digital ecosystems, as they emerge, they can track each other, they can watch each other, and then it gives us a basis, a real sort of firm basis to build lasting and sustainable architectures that mirror our agreements and the progress we're making at a human level. That was my last point, apparently. All right, but anyway, so the last point was basically saying, look, Ashley and I, through this, it took us some time, but it's possible. And I think we can do this with much more than just the labels and the notices. I think we can do this with quite a lot more to actually start harmonizing and orchestrating action across ecosystems. More to talk about it. I'm here at the workshop. Catch me there. Okay, very good.
Thank you. I think our next talk is Aaron. Oh, Adriana.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I don't have a slide, so I'm going to say that up front. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I just want to thank the Sarayaku community and the Licantine community from Chile and from Ecuador to receive us in their territories. We were very honored to be working with them. I'm going to tell you the story in a second. And thank you all for coming to this talk and listening to this story. I'm Adriana Corrales. I am a mycorrhizal scientist. Well, I work with fungi and eDNA. And this is part of like a big effort, team effort with local contexts, with MOD and with SPON, with the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks, which is a nonprofit that I work for. So I'm going to tell you a tiny bit what we study. We study mycorrhizal fungi, which are fungi that form associations with plants. More than 80% of plants on the planet depend on these fungi to live. It's not optional. So, and these fungi are microscopic networks that grow underground, but they are actually very important for ecosystem functioning. They capture a lot of carbon and they have a ton of diversity. So we're trying to actually understand these fungi globally. So SPON has a mission. It's three things. The first thing is map. We want to show the invisible in these maps. We want to document mycorrhizal diversity and put that in the hands of decision makers so they can really do something to protect these organisms that have been very ignored over many, many years. So we do that by creating these global maps and local maps, but we also do ground truthing of those maps by going into in the territories and collecting. We do this in many different ways. We do it ourselves, but we also have a granting program when we have people, mycorrhizal researchers from around the world, where we just give them the money and they do the work in their local community, in their local countries. And then we also use those data to protect, to actually try to get into policy and get into the public, get the story out, and then people excited to for the conservation. And we also want to harness for agriculture. These are vital organisms for agriculture, for sustainable agriculture, and also for carbon solutions. So we really want to put this in the portfolio of natural solutions. And this is our maps. So we collect, well, this is our data set, actually. We collect global data sets with our partner Global Fungi. This first version of the data set is only published data from scientific publications that have put together. And we use those to identify hotspots of biodiversity of mycorrhizal fungi around the world. We realize that only 10% or less of those are protected, for example. So we try to make those connections with these data sets. And also, as I said, we do ground truthing. So we do expeditions, and these expeditions, I'm the lead of expeditions. And to our principle basically is to do non-extractive, non-colonial expeditions. So we work very closely with local communities. And we try to go to the most underexplored areas in the world, because one of the things with global maps is we have a lot of knowledge gaps. So we try actively to go there and fill those global gaps of knowledge, but working very closely with local scientists and local communities. Then we take those maps, those data points, we put them in to train machine learning models. We validate those models with on the ground data. We interpret them, and we just give them to basically whoever wants that information to make decisions or to take care of their garden or whatever it is. So we have worked with two indigenous communities, the Sarayaku community in Ecuador and the Licanantay community in Atacama Desert in Chile. And then we start thinking about the governance of this data, because we don't want to put this data out there and know what is going to happen with them. So it was kind of working on uncharted territory, and we were super lucky to connect with our collaborators in MOD and in local contexts that have helped us so much to understand and to use these tools that we have heard about with the labels and the notices to protect this data. So one of the challenges is we work with environmental DNA. We don't want a specimen. We don't have a physical specimen. So how we protect those data? And also we have recognized a very strong interest of indigenous communities that have collaborated with us to publish. They want to be in the conversation. We want to be part of the scientific conversation. How can we do that while also protecting their data? So yeah, we're just getting into this. I'm not an expert at all in this. I just was a lab mycorrhizal scientist not long ago, and I'm getting into this, and I'm very passionate about this. Actually, it's really important. So we are basically this data, which the indigenous data, we treat them differently. We put them in different bins, and we don't publish them with our data sets at all. And then until we have like a very strong system when we know they're going to be protected. And basically we do this through local context platform. So I'm going to tell you about these 2 expeditions. And of course, if we care about conservation, we have to work with indigenous communities because they figured this out a long time ago. They are the heroes of conservation. Basically, they preserve 80% of the world biodiversity, so they have to be included in these data sets. And then I'm going to tell you about, for example, the Atacama expedition that we did with the Likanantai community, the Atacama Council. And we do this with community. We have to do community building if we want to work with indigenous communities. So we were very lucky that we were in contact with our DI person at Spawn, have done her whole PhD thesis working with lithium in the Atacama Desert. She was in close contact with the Atacameño community. So she was the one that really helped us to get in contact with these communities. And they were really excited to explore this because they have local indigenous monitoring systems, because they monitor very closely for the impact of mining, for example, in water. Water is a sacred element there. It's super scarce. Of course, with global change, is getting less and less. So they were very interested in monitoring everything, but they weren't monitoring mycorrhizal communities or soil DNA. So we were a good partner for them to get this data also that they had some interest on. So it was a long process, like almost a year process when we started conversations and paperwork, start the MOUs, right? The collaboration agreement, and negotiate the terms, and they feel comfortable with what we were doing. We felt comfortable with what we were doing too. And then we started also teaching basically everybody in the community about what these fungi are, what we were gonna do through some online workshops, like starting from what is a fungus, what is a mycorrhizal fungus, etc. So they could understand basically what we were going to do. And then the expedition finally happened. It was amazing. They took us to super remote sacred sites that they monitor. We were able to get data there. And then for them, actually, this was like super eye-opening because for them, the most important thing, it was to show that the desert is not empty, it's not desert. The desert has a lot of biodiversity, and basically the desert has been used like for mining and it's basically not very well protected because people think are empty. So they really wanted to show that they have been surviving for thousands of years in this environment, is their home, and it provides everything that they need, and it's not empty. It has a lot of things there. And they were super excited to show, for example, that we found a ton of biodiversity. We found thousands of fungi in the dunes of the desert. So that was very interesting. We also wanted so we went to these different ecosystems that we have no idea. There was like a lot of diversity in ecosystems there. And we also sample in the traditional croplands because they have irrigation channels that were made by the Incas like 1,000 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but it was just so interesting. And also, this is the map how it was before. The white part is like masked. There is no biological information from the Atacama Desert. We were able to actually change this. 5 minutes, okay. Yeah, So it was like very, very interesting. And these were the questions, and this is how it looks like, the channels that I was mentioning. And yeah, this is how the channels look like. And then we have a very strong post-expedition process as well, because part of what they have expressed, they don't want, indigenous communities don't want to collaborate, is because you go there, you collect your data, you leave, and they get nothing afterwards. So for us, it was super important to have a very strong post-expedition process too. When we give them back the results, we discuss them, we get feedback, and we are actually working in a scientific publication together, so we can, show the world basically that all this diversity is super important, and we are working with them to include them in the local context platform so they can create the labels as well. And now for the expedition in the Sarayaku territory, it was kind of, we were coming from this, but of course, a lot to learn. And this expedition was actually, we learned so much from MOT, More Than Humans Rights group in NYU, that is led by Cesar Rodriguez, which are a group of lawyers that work with nature's rights. And they were working already with the Sarayaku community, because this was super interesting. The Sarayaku has the cosmology is related to the Kausakstacha concept, which is that the forest is actually a whole living organism and is worth of rights on its own. And they really connected with the idea of mycorrhizal networks, like being these connecting entities that connect plants with the soil and everything. There is life everywhere, basically. So, so we started collaborating with MOT and with local context as well to work with Sarayaku and to document the mycorrhizal communities that are in their territory, because they want to also know the biodiversity associated to their territory, to defend their territory against extractive mining, for example, or other type of projects there. So it's very threatening, actually. Like, they have been fighting for the territory for a long time. So we did something similar. We did the pre-expedition. We did a lot of relation building. We did a lot of, we did our MOUs and everything. And then oh, yeah, it happened to me too. So yeah, we did the expedition. We had very interesting results. We also collected in the traditional croplands. We found very interesting diversity patterns there that I'm not gonna talk about, but we are also in the process of the post-expedition when we are giving them back their data. And they are actually super excited to see how much diversity is there and how they are protecting, because they really care about protecting this biodiversity. So we're learning, as I said, we're just learning, because this is like brand new territory. So our future steps are really to understand how to implement the labels, how to protect this data, how to decide if include this in the global data sets or not. Are we going to put them there so people recognize there is a lot of biodiversity, or we shouldn't put them there to protect them? We are having all those conversations. This is the type of maps, local maps that we do. And that's just the number of mycorrhizal species that we found in each of these places. And yes, we are also working with them in a scientific publication. They're also really interested in that. We were part of that documentary as well, showing the whole process, how we worked there. That was very cool. Yes, I wanted to show you some. Oh, it's not here. Hold on. Oh, okay. It's not here. I don't know why. If I jump over it. And we have, at Spawn, we have a granting program. And actually in Sarayaku, there is a scientist that was super interested in keep working on mycorrhizal. So he has now an underground explorers grant from us to continue exploring the territory on his own. And we just put him in in contact with the local scientists from Ecuador that are gonna help them to do the DNA part, and then they will have the data more data from their territory, and they can continue to work with us in the room. So yes, that's what I want to tell. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we have a film. Okay, we'll let some people come out, people come in. It's tight in here. Okay, so this is Aaron Wilton from Manaaki, Whenua, and Meredith McKay. Meredith is here in the audience for questions later. Aaron was unable to join us, but we're just going to play the presentation from Aaron.
This collection is And that is, it's what I mean, we have a notion. A biocultural only 40 so we're really excited. Once that connection was looking for virtual subset of the collection was looking at one convention. You can see the first species that was predicted in the writing of Botanical. It was the most of the protein. Here we can now some of the ways we have is associated with the technology, but also means it's not with the hope based on the successes in the mitigation for 5% one of the things emerging from this group obviously not associated with the stuff of species, but then also the other things with this over place we have to be part of it. It is critical that information process. They do have the information for another option. It could be the result of data we have no other information, but it's going to put another information and documented database online. The approach that we have to highlight is illustration information for LGBTQ as shown here on this other screen. And MPT like this illustration allows us to do structural implementation of the local community associated with the people. The example on this slide shows what this looks like with the local content approaches associated with the journey. In addition to the federated data, we have recently used the data to improve the approach. Based on our experience in this group of technical work to implement local concrete direction setting, not hard. So there's more like the operation tool, which is recognized, pros of greenfield, and the cultural product associated with the direction. But we don't see that. Rather, we see them as a trend. We're also one the idea of and actually put in place is even for the limited solution localized data. The back of the version of local country, but especially like from breaking and thank you for the opportunity to be involved in Manaaki.
Great. Okay, so staying with us, we have two more amazing folks to go. There are two seats. Sit. It's already brown. Okay, Rose. Yeah.
Yes, microphone over. Thank you. And I'm pointing at the back. Okay. Can everyone hear me? There's a seat at the front. Okay. Dongal Jolly, everyone. My name is Rose Barrowcliffe. I'm Bachelor of the Whenua clan. Our country is on the east coast of Australia. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Critical, or Centre of Critical Indigenous Studies at Macquarie University. I'm not a scientist. I study archival theory. Particularly, I look at Indigenous rights and representation in archives, collecting institutions, but because archives and collecting institutions hold what is now considered data, or it has always been considered data, but I tend to talk more broadly about Indigenous rights in all across data spaces. So I want to talk to you today about one of my research projects. It's very fitting that I'm following on from the Manaaki Whenua project because that was an inspiration for the project I'm going to talk to you about today. I just want to acknowledge the partners on this project. It was made possible by funding from Enrich. I was the Enrich Global Co-Chair for 2023-2024. So the funding for that is what made this work possible. It's in partnership with New York Botanical Garden, the Language Data Commons of Australia, ARNet, and of course the local context team. So maybe let me just go back a second. I'll leave that there. So in archival theory, we have what's called the right to know. So this has been around since the late 70s. It originated in the US. And the right to know is about Indigenous people's right to know about any information about us. So it is originally conceived in the way that people should know, or Indigenous people should know about any personal or community or cultural information about us that is held in government institutions or collecting bodies. But that has grown or expanded over the years, and it much more aligns now with Indigenous data sovereignty rights, where it's not just personal information or cultural information that we have the right to know about, but it's also about anything about our lands, and similar to the definitions for what Indigenous data are, about resources and non-human kin. So I tend to draw across 3 different definitions of what Indigenous data are, and that really underpins my work. And it's really important to understand that because I work with large collecting institutions and so often get told that, oh, what we have in our collection is not really relevant to Indigenous people because it's not cultural knowledge. So when this project came about because I was in New York and we went for a visit to New York Botanical Garden, and just flippantly I asked, well, do you have much Australian material there in your collections here? And I wasn't expecting that it would be tens of thousands of specimens collected from Australia. And because I'm Indigenous and because I see the world through this lens, my next question was, whose country do all these specimens come from? And of course, the MYBG staff couldn't answer that question, as most collecting institutions wouldn't be able to. So that's what prompted this project, which is about piloting a process for being able to identify which traditional lands or Indigenous lands data comes from. So this was very much a collaborative process with New York Botanical Garden, as I said. I was fortunate that we had someone on the ground, Dakota Fyra, who came onto the project as a research assistant who was studying museum studies at MYBG at the time. And through Jane's support, he got an internship with New York Botanical Garden and was able to spend time with the physical collection. So I live and work in Australia. And we had to sort of mediate access to these collections between what's available online and what isn't. So there's about, we think, Dakota did a audit and we were able to estimate that there's probably about 25,000 specimen records at NYBG that are not catalogued at all, that were collected from Australia. So that means they are completely not findable unless you were there in the collection in New York. So that was no good to us. Secondly, so that we've put that at tier 0, so it's completely unfindable. It's the most dark of darkest data, if you will. The next tier 1, about 12,500 specimens that are data-based, but they only have the most rudimentary metadata, and they're not pushed through to aggregators like GBIF. So for this project, we were working at a tier 2 level where we were only looking at specimens that had been databased, digitized, transcribed, and were available through GBIF. So that was the bare minimum that we could look at, because I needed to be able to see these specimens from Australia, so I need to be able to see them remotely. What we chose to focus on and what we needed for this project was to know the physical location where the specimens were collected. So we created a data set which we exported out of GBIF at the tier 3 level. That was the specimens that were databased, imaged, transcribed, and they had geolocation metadata. So initially that was around 10,000 records, and then over the time we were working on the project, it grew to be over 11,000 records. So I'm going to come back and talk about tier 4 in a minute. But so what we did, we worked with our partners at LDACA and ARNet, who gave us some amazing coding skills and geospatial analysis skills. And we first mapped all of the collection points around Australia. So if you can see here, you can see all the dots, not very clearly, I guess, but you can see the orange dots. That's the collection points of all the specimens that we were looking at. What we found, though, when we did that, is that there was metadata there. There was, in some of the records, there was metadata for descriptions of the locality of where the specimen had been collected, but there wasn't actually a lat long. So we used another data set called the Gazetteer of Australian Place Names, and we were able to parse another 3,500 approximately locations. So 3,200, stand corrected by my own slide. So we were able to place a lot more records than actually had geolocation metadata. So that became step 2 that we weren't planning on, but it was really important that we do that. And then we needed to think about, well, what data sets do we have that can tell us whose Indigenous lands these points relate to? So Australia is very different to Aotearoa in that we don't have any treaties. So we have native titles, some of you might have heard of or be familiar with, but since colonisation, we don't have any federal recognition or boundaries that say that we have Indigenous governance over these areas. So we had to rely on other data sets to sort of patch together a picture of who the relevant Indigenous peoples were. So we started out with native lands, the same data set that was used on the Manaaki Whenua project. In Australia, again, it's a problematic data set for us, and it is disputed by a lot of Indigenous peoples because the information that was used to create those polygons came from white anthropologists, basically. So there's a lot of debate about whether the anthropologists recorded the information about the peoples on those lands in accurate ways. Some First Nations are completely left out of that map. Some dispute the boundaries, a lot of them dispute the boundaries of those polygons. Nevertheless, it was a good place to start to give an indication of who might be related to the collection point for the specimen. The next one we worked with, because the LDACA team who are partners on this are a language project, they have access to some language data sets. So what we did is, instead of thinking about a First Nation per se, so let's think a tribe name, what we did was we thought about who are the language groups. So a language group might transcend tribal boundaries. So that's the second map you can see in the middle there. And it's immediately obvious that it doesn't cover all of Australia. So it's useful to a degree, but only if you're in one of those, oh, thank you. If you're in one of those language groups that appears in that data set, which is called the Asher and Mosley glottography. The third one on the bottom, because what we really, really want to get to is where Indigenous people, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, are asserting their own relationship to country. We don't want to be external to the community and saying, well, this specimen belongs to this community. That's not our place, and it's not the institution's place to do that. So the only data set that we could think of in Australia that currently does that is the native title data set, where communities and peoples have said, this is our country, and the federal government has recognised that. Native title is hugely problematic in its own right, but again, it's a good place to start. So you can see the green areas are determined, so they've been through a process where they've been recognised at a federal level to say, yes, we recognise Indigenous governance over this area. So by going through those processes, we've now been able to infer a relationship between those 11,000 plus records and between 102 or 286 Indigenous peoples in Australia, depending on which data set you talk to. So we're finishing up the first phase of the project now. What we're doing is pushing that enriched or the parsed metadata for the extra geolocations back into the NYBG catalogue, so they have that information as well. We are also pushing back into the NYBG catalogue a text string which says the collection point or this location is associated with these people, these people, these people, and citing the source. So very importantly, we're not actually saying this record is from this tribal group. We are just pointing to sources, so the information is there for people to make their own decisions. So the overall goal of this is to make these specimens findable. So we're very much focusing on the first two aspects of the FAIR principles. So making them findable and accessible to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are more than likely going to be accessing this through the online catalogue or through GBIF from Australia. So when they search for either their language name, their clan name, their native title group, it will bring up the records that have an association with that. The next steps of the project are putting in place notices, so the local context TK or BC notices it will be, and then socialising it. So we've been talking about this project a lot in Australia at different conferences where we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups in attendance. Every single time after the talk, we get tons of communities coming up and saying, do you have any specimens from our country? So then we push out a report to them to say, here's what there is from your community. And then the goal is to work with those communities to be able to develop their TK labels, and they work directly with NYBG in this case. But we've already started piloting this on Australian collections as well. So in this case, it was a relatively small data set. We've just run it on the Melbourne Herbarium, which was something like 800,000 specimens. So that's just one collecting institution in Australia. So, repeating this process and refining it and improving the findability and accessibility so Indigenous communities or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities can then enact their rights to these specimens. And I'll leave it there. Okay. Where am I?
Great. Okay, we have one last presentation, and I think hopefully you've got a sense of how much work this takes, how much work it takes to find Indigenous collections and then to connect communities back to it. I think Lydia said yesterday, it's been 500 years of doing this without Indigenous participation. It's going to take a really long time to kind of undo some of those legacies. But what started as an idea in 2010 to actually develop a tool to practically do this work, to get to 2015, it's taken 15 years. And all of the collaborations that we have to kind of make it real, visible, functional, and robust. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Kyle to talk about what GBIF is doing.
All right. Can you guys hear me? All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Actually, you would, I would be honored. All right. So I'm going to stay here for a second. Right. So thank you everyone for coming. And it's really an honor, humbling honor to join the rest of these presentations and follow it up. I'm going to apologize in advance because I might get a little emotional, but I'm going to leave that bit till later, hopefully, right? So good afternoon, Kunmute. It's an honor to be here, and I'm going to share the work underway to support the GBIF Indigenous Data Governance Task Group through a pilot implementation of local context labels and notices within the GBIF infrastructure. So I want to get this right on some of these, so I'm not going to read the entire presentation, I promise. So this work has already led us to some pretty unexpected challenges and surprises and insights. And the work that I'm going to share today is actually quite different from what I envisioned probably when I wrote an abstract. That's somewhat reflected. I mean, the people that are involved with this is just the short list. There are many other groups and individuals involved in this work. Next slide, please. Is it fair to say that we have a basic understanding of GBIF in here? Does anyone need the primer? Like, you know, we keep coming up, we're showing up in different things, Lydia's talk. All right, so if that's the case, you know, maybe we move on. And I want to point out that this work is being overseen by the Indigenous Data Governance Task Group. We began this toward the end of 2024. And we had the pleasure last night of actually meeting all together in person for the first time last night, socially. We're here again. Can I just ask for a show of hands if you're on the task group? I think we have a quorum. We could turn this into a meeting if need be. So maybe you'll stay on after. You know, really what we're looking at is trying to think about how we build on the FAIR principles and embed the CARE principles in our work. We're only just getting started. These other projects that you've seen today have had more time and are developed more fully, but we're eager to sort of build on and learn from those experiences in many other ways. Next, please. So, yeah, I mean, this work wouldn't happen without the assistance and the infrastructure that local context provides. You know, what we're eager to do is through this pilot, try to understand how we might operationalize CARE with local context, and then really sort of provide some level of test cases, use cases, trials to understand how we might do more things. As you will have seen from the video from Aaron, I should actually pronounce that in Kiwi, shouldn't I? Aaron Wilton. You know, there are multiple ways, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. Next slide, please. So for the pilot, we identified 3 communities that we wanted to work with. We have Tawaka that Aaron described. Tora Whenua, this is a collaboration between the Gump Research Institute in Moorea, along with other partners, including metadata game changers, Aaron Robinson, I'll go Kiwi again, who's been a very important member of the team and helped us work through the technical bits. And then the Seri Jaku, who Adriana spoke about. In addition, we're working very closely with GBIF nodes in New Zealand, in France, and hopefully in Ecuador, although politics are a little tenuous just now. Next slide, please. So, is it possible? Like, at a certain level, the project started with the idea, can we do this? Actually, we already can, because GBIF, because we index and display the indices of measurement. In fact, actually all extensions within our infrastructure. You can see it, right? So here's a specimen from New Zealand, and I think this is one of Aaron's. And here's the information that comes through from local context. So, we're kind of okay, right? Next slide. So, oh yeah, that's the detail. So mission accomplished. All right, so we can go to lunch then. Next slide, please. Obviously, this is not sufficient, right? It's here, it's in there, it's not indexed in a way that's searchable. It's not a way of actually giving people access so that we can help people understand, particularly like in the examples that Rose were sharing, being able to, help Indigenous communities identify those records that relate to specimens where they have a relation to. So next slide, please. What we sort of see is an experimentation phase going on. And you've seen a little bit of that, and actually you've seen more than is represented here. I'm going to talk about kind of 4 efforts that go along here. There's a little bit of duplication. First, I'll talk about the pilot, what we're doing within the GBIF Secretariat here at this very early stage. The next one, you've just seen Aaron's video, right? So this is about an ITPT extension. There's another sort of effort that, Clara, do you have a presentation tomorrow? So I'd encourage you to come to Clara Baringo's presentation tomorrow about work that SIB in the GBIF node in Brazil, along with SIB Colombia and GBIF Argentina are working on around some other things. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then finally, a last note of another kind of coincidence of opportunities that may lead us to advance some of these things rather quickly. Next slide, please. So first one, I mean, you will have seen this actually, a very similar screenshot in Aaron's video. This is us leveraging what a service that GBIF provides called a hosted portal service that allows any community, any group, any institution, country to sort of look at a slice of data from the GBIF index and present it through a simple data access portal, along with some additional context. So we're using that as a means of trying to expose our first efforts to show local context labels in the context of individual records. This is and we thought this is actually what I thought I'd be presenting today, but it turns out it's a little hard, and we have a lot of different things to line up, and it's not just on our end on the technical. It's making sure that we all have the right API access, we all have the right project privacy settings. So it's gone slower than we expected, but we do think that this will be a useful visualization tool. So we will, when that is available and sensible to share, we will be making that available. We think it will be a powerful way of showing, just what this could do. But it does provide us, even at this early stage, a quick way of linking occurrences and data sets to labels and notices. We're using the flexibility of Darwin Core, a field called dynamic properties, to essentially shoehorn some additional information, the metadata that comes from local context into records. We do not recommend this as a long-term strategy. This is a way to try and get something up quickly that we are then able to share and build on. But we have other more interesting things going on. Next slide, please. So we have Aaron's work, which he didn't actually highlight the sort of software development that he has been working on quite as much as I guess maybe we were thinking about. We really think a lot of Aaron's work. I mean, as he said, he has been with Manaaki, Whenua. Am I getting, yeah, new name for Landcare. he's been there for a long time. He's given these issues a lot of thought, and he's very technically proficient and skilled. So we wanted to be able to, acknowledge that work. This may be a very important piece of the puzzle, and it may be that we have some diversity of approaches for some time. The benefit of Darwin Core is that it's flexible. The challenge of Darwin Core is that it's flexible. And we know, like we can't sort of come to everyone, anyone who's interested in implementing labels and notices on records they share with GBIF and just say, well, what do you want to do? Like pick, So we will have to provide some guidance, but as we sort of look at some of the technical innovations that are coming out of the network right now, we may benefit from having more than one approach in the short term. It's quite possible that what Aaron is working on could help us and the work that he's already done could sort of get us there more quickly. Okay, next slide, please. Then I want to mention the work of SIB-BR, SIB Colombia, and GBIF Argentina and their partners. They have some funding from a project out of GBIF's core budget that then is looking at 3 different case studies, interesting case studies. How about you just all go tomorrow, right? If you agree, you all go tomorrow. We can sort of skip the details. An important piece of this is that they've also proposed a task group to TADWIG. And of course, as a standards-driven network, this is a really important step for us to convene experts and talk about how we might approach a standardized approach to things like local context labels. So lots more, another channel where this is somewhat different than the technical part, or it's the social part of the technical part, where we will get experts together and kind of work through what's the best way to do this. Next slide, please. And then the last thing that I'll note as important in this discussion is, some of you may be aware, there is a thing called the Darwin Core Data Package that is out for public review right now. It's very complicated. There is a 90-day review where usually there's 30. But in talking with my colleagues who are, in particular, Tim Robertson, Deputy Director and Head of Informatics at GBIF, about some of the questions that we had with local context, there's an opportunity to actually submit a public comment to this during this public review period that could lead to some adjustments in the proposed Darwin Core Data Package. Now, we're not trying to shortcut anything. We're taking advantage of the fact that, we're asking for comment, but it provides us the opportunity with what Jane talked about at the top, which is that local context labels, these are rights information. And within the Darwin Core Data Package schema, this is sort of the basic diagram, if any of you would look. Down in the bottom corner, the no way that you're reading that is usage policy. So we can actually align those rights fields that local context serve with what goes into that table schema. That table schema is an implementation that GBIF is responsible for. And so that's not something that is formally part of the standard. It is an implementation. So we think this is really important and valuable. We have to see through how the rest of the process for the public review goes, but it's promising in that we can get things aligned from the very start, at least as relates to Darwin Core Data Packaging. We still have to figure out Darwin Core Archive, which again, Aaron's work may help. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple quick plugs. We have a mailing list. If this interests you, if you want to follow this, you want to be involved, you're working on projects that you want to have come in at an appropriate time, join a mailing list. This is a simple listserv, one-to-many communications, old school, right? But share your work, introduce yourself, tell us what you're working on, and we'll do the same. This will be an important channel for us to communicate the work. Next one, we have a survey. Lydia showed you some results yesterday. We want more responses. If you've made it this far to come into the room today and you haven't filled the survey out, please do. We really want to know, this is an opportunity for us to take the pulse of the community, understand what you need, what you know, and try to think about really being efficient about servicing your needs. One more. And then there are a bunch of, we've got all the task group members in here. people keep talking. Actually, Cass, I think, has another 10 talks. Is it 10 left? But most important, I want to mention that tonight, tonight's Wednesday. I've had a really hard time knowing what day of the week it is for some days now. Tonight, Wednesday, at 6:30, we have a open social event in the gallery room, which I believe is up here. It's second floor. That's all I know. I know that there is a plenary in the ballroom. It wasn't scheduled when we started this. So come join us. You have all kinds of parties to go to, right? And last slide, please. Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so back to reading, and we'll see how I do with this, right? I want to conclude with a brief personal note of gratitude and thank our partners and collaborators, including the task group, for allowing me to serve this work. I'm lucky to know how profoundly mixed my own ancestry is. And it combines Euro-Atlantic settlers from the colonies of New France, New Sweden, New England, Maryland, New York, and Virginia, alongside many indigenous peoples of the northeastern US, Montauk, Pequot, Patawomeck, Lenape, Brothertown, Oneida, and Stockbridge Munsee Mohican. If you were paying attention to the first set of slides, I can't remember whether Jane or Maui showed it, but you know, this is the second occurrence of the Stockbridge Munsee Mohican in this talk. The more I seek to understand the heritage of dispossession, dispersal, loss, denial, and survivance in my own family, the more clearly I see that this work that all of us, that's been presented in this room today, has a broader part to play in healing our own relations, both with each other, through the deep ties of affinity and kinship, parenche, and with the more than human world we inhabit. So, niawen, wuniwe, anishi. Thank you. Yode.
Okay, so we made it through. That is crazy. And there is more later. So I guess there's 3 things before I move into we have 10 minutes for questions. 5 minutes for questions. Okay, gonna have to be snappy. Come back after lunch. Have some food, maybe 4 Cokes, and come back afterwards and ask those questions that don't get asked now, or connect to somebody in the team that's here. And also there's all this material over on the side. We have comics that we've written. We try and make this as accessible as possible, you guys. We have comics, we have information sheets, we have films, all the things that can help you know more about what this initiative is about. So this is an opportunity for you to ask any of the panelists a question. It could be a technical question, could be about starting a project, but I just want to open it for you guys to ask 2 questions. Okay, we have one in the chat, but they can wait. 1 second.
So those conversations are sort of ongoing. We've had discussions with them about where that sits. Obviously connects to all the conversations about digital sequence information and benefit sharing. And so I think just like the conversations about sort of local context, care principles, and indigenous data governance started here, you know, amongst these communities a few years ago, they're just starting to work their way through. And I think what we've got is really different researchers that are committed to doing it, that have put it in local places. and done what they can to, visualize it. But we're trying to get it to the infrastructure conversations in those places in the same way it's happening here at GBIF.
Okay, I'll start off on that one. Okay, I think if I was correct in hearing it, is about the challenges that are posed within natural history museums and the different kinds of so this is about really the notices and how the notices can support people within institutions to disclose those collections. One of the biggest problems within natural history museums is lack of provenance that sits around the collections to start with. That is the ground zero problem. This is exactly what Rose was talking about. And so kind of starting to work. So many people in institutions actually do want to do the right thing, do want to connect to communities, want to actually step up and kind of think about these questions and understand what the legacy of colonialism is within those institutions. These practices weren't in place then. The catalogs were terrible. We have impoverished metadata everywhere. And so the notices are just the first step to kind of help say, hey, we know there's a problem here. Acknowledging that there is a problem is actually a really good first step. And then secondly, starting to do the work of collaborating with communities, notifying communities, putting notices and disclosing those collections to communities. Because I'll say it again, if communities can't find that data, you can't govern that data. And then you can't also work out what the data gaps are. So when I talk about impoverished data, that's what I mean. And so that's a key first step to do.
And probably one of the other things as well is you've seen all of these examples have been groups that were working directly with communities. And you go, oh, look, if I haven't got someone, and it's always easier when that's the case because you can turn around to the rest of the institution and go, I'm being responsive. I'm sort of helping this group get somewhere. But that's not always the case that people have that sort of partnership in place. So the sorts of things that get done with putting the notices in place is making those changes in the infrastructure that allow those partnerships to develop in the future. So there are things that can be done independent of a community relationship, working with the local context team just to get ready and prepared. So some of the notices about doing that, disclosing it, and the other one's about trying to make the changes in the system so that those things can happen.
And I would add that we have an institutions working group. An institutions working group actually connects people who are having these same questions with each other. So that some answers that might have been found out in one place can be shared across into another. Well, thank you. I think that that's a fantastic point to finish on. And if any of you are talking to iNaturalist later, that might be one place to have to extend this conversation as well. Okay, thank you, everybody. Yeah, please come back or come up to us or take some materials and come to the drinks later and just hang out. We're friendly. We love chatting. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Hi, very quick.